I've been hiking and photographing wildlife since I was 17. Not full-time, not professionally, not in the get flown to Alaska to film grizzlies kind of way. More like weekend pilgrimages and week-long trips I planned 6 months in advance. I'd call myself semi-professional. I've sold prints, had a few pieces published, and picked up enough sponsors to keep my gear updated. But really, I do it because it's quiet. No phones, no notifications. Just me, the trees, and the occasional fox if I'm lucky. This trip was a bit different. The forest I chose wasn't one of my usual haunts. It was tucked in the northern corner of a national park I'd barely explored, an area people tended to avoid. Not for any particular reason, as far as I could tell. Just forgotten. The trails that were overgrown, the signage faded or gone entirely. It felt untouched, wild, and that was exactly what I wanted. I packed light, my tent, a few days worth of food for trail cameras, and my DSLR with a zoom lens the size of my forearm. The plan was to set up the cameras in a wide perimeter, covering deer paths, a small stream, and one odd choice I made on a whim, a camera aimed directly at my own tent. It started as a joke, honestly. I never pointed a trail cam at myself before. The whole point was to avoid people. But that morning, while setting up, I looked back at the little orange dome I called home for the week and thought, why not? Maybe I'd catch a raccoon poking around, or get some artsy shot of fog creeping in at night. It felt like something different, and in the quiet of the woods, with nothing but time, different was enough. The first day passed like any other. I hiked, I photographed, I sat for hours in the cold, waiting for movement. Caught a glimpse of a coyote at dusk. Heard an owl later that night. Nothing out of the ordinary. I kept the fire low and let it die early. The silence was complete out there, thicker than I'd anticipated. The kind of silence that hums in your ears. You start to imagine sounds just to fill the void. The second night, I heard what I assumed were raccoons. Little shuffles just beyond the tree line. Dry leaves rustling. A stick cracking under something's weight. I stayed still, listening. The sound stopped, then started again. Louder this time. I turned on my headlamp and scanned the trees, but saw nothing. Probably just animals. Probably. By the third day, the unease had started to settle into my bones. Nothing big, just small, creeping thoughts. Like the way the underbrush never seemed to rustle unless I was already watching. Or the fact that my food bag, hung high in a tree, looked just a little lower than I remembered. Maybe the knot had slipped. Maybe I was just tired. Still, I felt the need to keep checking over my shoulder. That night, I didn't sleep well. Something brushed against the side of my tent. A soft drag, like a branch or a sleeve. I told myself it was wind. I even laughed about it the next morning while packing up. Just nature playing tricks on a mind too used to screens and city noise. It was a long hike back to the trailhead and an even longer drive home. By the time I dumped my pack inside and started unpacking gear, the tension had mostly faded. The air of normalcy returned with the hum of the refrigerator and the familiar clutter of my apartment. I made coffee, plugged in the memory cards, transferred the files. Routine. I always check the trail cams first before reviewing the DSLR shots. They tell the story of what happened when I wasn't looking, and I like knowing the forest kept moving without me. The first 3 cameras had what I expected, some deer, 1 bear sniffing around the stream, a lot of nothing. The days blurred together in the footage. Time compressed. Sunlight creeping across the forest floor. Trees breathing. Night falling like a curtain. Then I opened the last folder. The one from the camera aimed at my tent. The clips were uneventful at first. Just still frames of my tent bathed in moonlight. Trees swaying in the breeze. On one night, fog rolled in and clung low to the ground. It was almost beautiful. I clicked through a few more files, expecting more of the same. But then, on the third night, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a shadow, just a trick of movement and darkness. But when I paused the video and went back frame by frame, it was clear something had moved at the edge of the frame. Just a shape at first, a blur. But then there, in one single frame, illuminated by the faint green glow of night vision, a hand. Pale, elongated, pressed flat against the forest floor. Not an animal, not some branch caught in the breeze. A hand. It was low to the ground, the fingers splayed unnaturally wide, not reaching toward the tent, crawling, The next frame, it was gone. I played the clip again. Slower this time. The hand didn't move like it was supporting a body. It moved like it was the body. Smooth. Purposeful. Like it knew exactly how far it could push into the frame before being seen. My stomach sank. I closed the file, then reopened it. Same thing. Frame by frame. Nothing else appeared in the rest of the footage. No sound. No second glimpse. But the impression it left clung to me like cold sweat. That clip was recorded at 3:17 a.m., and I remembered waking up that night, just briefly, hearing something soft, something close. At the time, I thought it was the wind. Now I wasn't so sure. After finding the hand in that single frame, sleep didn't come easily. I told myself it had to be a trick of light, some distortion in the lens, or a branch shaped just wrong. But the more I told myself that, the more I needed to prove it. So I dug in. I rewatched everything. The other trail cams still felt like an anchor to reality. One picked up a fox creeping through brush. Another had a full sequence of a deer pausing at the stream for a drink, lifting its head suddenly, ears alert before vanishing off-screen. Even the bear was comforting in its way. Familiar, tangible. That's what the trail cams were supposed to be for. Wildlife. Nothing more. But the tent-facing camera was something else entirely. I sorted the footage by timestamp, beginning from the first night. Each clip was recorded in short bursts, motion-triggered, lasting anywhere from 10 seconds to a minute. The first night was quiet, just wind in the trees. No movement, no anomalies. Then came a second night, and 3:17 a.m. That time kept appearing. I didn't notice it right away. The files were named with long, nondescript strings of numbers, but when I started cross-checking the timestamps, that number returned again and again. 3:17, every night. 3 nights in a row. Something always happened then. The second night's clip showed the same angle of the tent, framed between trees. A soft breeze moved the leaves, barely perceptible in the grainy green-black footage. Then there, in the bottom right corner, just movement, a shadow, crawling. I leaned in, pausing and advancing frame by frame. It entered the edge of the frame low, almost pressed to the ground, moving with a slow, dragging motion. Whatever it was, it stayed just outside the center, like it knew where the camera's focus ended. Then it stopped. Mid-motion, the shape became a lump of shadow, unmoving, and it stayed like that. For nearly 4 minutes, it didn't so much as twitch. Not even when a breeze shifted the canopy or a leaf dropped nearby. I watched the time code. From 3 hours, 17 minutes and 8 seconds to 3 hours, 21 minutes and 2 seconds, it remained utterly still. I've spent enough time filming animals to know that nothing holds that kind of stillness in the wild. Even predators shift their weight, blink, breathe. This thing, whatever it was, acted more like it was waiting. Not hiding, not stalking. Waiting. I moved on to the third night. Again, 3:17 a.m. A new clip. This time, the thing entered from the opposite side. It didn't scurry like a raccoon. It dragged. Fluid, deliberate. But here was the part that really got under my skin. It never once entered the center of the shot. In 3 separate clips, 3 different nights, it crept around the very edges of the frame. Always at 3:17. Always crawling. And always staying just out of view. I tried enhancing the brightness. Played around with the contrast. I wanted to catch a glimpse of a face, maybe even just the silhouette of a head. But the footage was stubborn. Even when paused, its movement stayed vague. Hints of limbs, elongated, disjointed, nothing that resembled any animal I'd ever seen. And then there were the sounds. In the third clip, beneath the ambient hum of crickets and leaves shifting in the wind, there was something else. Faint, rhythmic, a crunching, like underbrush being pressed down. Carefully, slowly, and something like breathing, wet and shallow as if just off mic. I began to replay that section over and over again, headphones on, the volume maxed. It was quiet but undeniably there. That sound of weight shifting through leaves, slow and purposeful, like a body dragging itself just outside the reach of light. Every time I tried to convince myself it was a badger or some nocturnal mammal behaving oddly, the image of that frozen, waiting shape returned to me. I went back to my notes, to my memory of the trip. Nothing had felt off during the day. It was only at night that the strange sense of being watched had crept in. The woods felt different after dark. That was normal. But now, looking at these recordings, I started to wonder if I was ever truly alone out there. Then came the final clip, the one that broke whatever denial I had left. The footage began like the others, 3:17 a.m. The camera panned slightly in the wind, capturing the side of the tent. Nothing unusual. Then the screen glitched. Not static, not a signal loss, just a hiccup, a digital stutter. A moment where the video skipped ahead. When it resumed, the image had changed. The tent's zipper was no longer flush. It was slightly open, just a sliver, maybe an inch, but definitely unzipped. I stared at it, rewound, paused, went back to earlier footage from the same night. Before the glitch, the zipper was sealed tight. I always closed it fully before bed, habit drilled in from too many buggy nights in the woods. But after that skip in the recording, those missing seconds, it was open, just a bit, enough for something to slip in or out. There was no sound in that clip, no movement, just that subtle shift in the fabric, as if something had tested the boundary, as if something wanted to remind me it had been closer than I realized. I sat back in my chair, sweat drying cold on my skin. My apartment was silent, but it didn't feel empty, the kind of silence that presses in around you. That makes you turn off your monitor just to check the reflections in the screen. That camera had been aimed at the tent for fun, a novelty, a curiosity. Now it felt like a warning, or worse, an invitation. And something had answered. Rational thought didn't bring me back to the forest. Obsession did, the kind that plants itself somewhere deep in the skull and festers. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. The unanswered questions, the patterns in the footage, the hand, the movement, the half-open zipper. Every explanation I offered myself felt weaker than the last. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince myself I was going for closure. That was a lie, and I knew it. I was going because I had to, because I needed to see it again, or prove to myself that there was nothing to see. I returned to the exact same location. It looked the same on the surface. Same clearing, same trees, the same hush in the air like the woods were holding their breath. Even a moss growing up the base of one gnarled pine hadn't changed. But there was a tension in the silence I hadn't felt the first time around. A presence in the stillness. As if something new, I had come back. I set up camp quickly, working with mechanical precision. This time I brought more cameras, 3 mounted externally, all aimed at the tent from different angles. One high up in a tree, one facing the front entrance directly, and another placed lower to the ground for anything creeping in from below eye level. And one more inside the tent. That was the new addition, a compact, motion-activated camera set on a small tripod just inside the flap, pointed inward. I told myself this would be the night that answered everything. When darkness fell, it fell hard, thicker than before. The fire I built seemed to give off less light than it should have, as if the shadows were swallowing it. I sat for hours beside it, trying not to listen too closely to the sounds just beyond the ring of light. Eventually, I forced myself into the tent. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay wrapped in my sleeping bag, still as stone, every sound outside amplified 100-fold. The trees creaked. A gust of wind sent dry needles tumbling across the forest floor. And then, sometime after midnight, I heard it. The crunching, soft at first, leaves shifting, a single twig snapping under weight. Then silence. Then more crunching, closer this time. Methodical, measured. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The sound circled the tent. Not fast, not hesitant, deliberate, like something pacing, testing, thinking. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. The sounds eventually faded, swallowed by the vast silence of the forest. I didn't sleep after that. By the time the sun broke through the trees, I was already out of the tent, pulling memory cards and packing up. I didn't waste time. Every snap of a twig beneath my boots made me flinch. I thought coming back would ease my fears. Instead, it turned them into something sharper. Back at home, I sat in front of my computer, heart thudding in my throat. The footage from the 3 external cameras was first. All three showed the same quiet scene, trees swaying in the wind, the tent bathed in moonlight, nothing moving. I played the clips on a loop, hoping for even a flicker of motion in the background. But there was nothing. No hand, no shape, no movement. Then came the footage from inside the tent. It started with static. The camera had triggered sometime around 3:14 a.m. The first few seconds were empty. The tent interior lit only by a faint wash of gray-green from the night vision mode. My sleeping bag was visible. I was lying still, eyes closed, breathing steady. Then, at 3:17 a.m., the zipper began to move. Slowly. So slow it almost looked like it was unzipping on its own. But the motion was smooth, steady, controlled. Not the wind. Not an accident. Just a few inches. The camera picked up no sound. Only the soft whir of the lens adjusting focus. And then, in the narrow gap of the flap, something appeared. A shape, crouched low. Still, only the top of a head was visible. Hairless, pale, skin so smooth it reflected the faint light in a way that didn't seem real. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched. Then the footage cut to static. The timestamp jumped forward exactly 11 seconds. When the image returned, the flap was zipped up again. The tent sealed. I was still in my sleeping bag. Still sleeping. I stared at the screen for a long time. Replayed it. Over and over. That blank stare. That stillness. The way it seemed to hover just outside the boundary between inside and out. The fact that the zipper had been moved and then reset. Like it had changed its mind. Or maybe it never needed to come all the way in. I sat back, shaking. Then I noticed something else. In the final few seconds of the clip, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, the camera angle had shifted. Just slightly. Enough that it was no longer centered on the tent entrance. It was aimed directly at me. The shift was subtle, a few degrees at most, but unmistakable. The lens had been adjusted. The final frame of the footage showed my sleeping face. Still, vulnerable. I had never touched the camera after placing it. I would have remembered if I had. I scrubbed back through the footage, trying to find the moment it moved. There was no record of it. Only the 11 seconds of static. A perfect gap. Just long enough to step inside. Just long enough to shift the camera. Just long enough to leave without a trace. The more I watched, the more that single frame unsettled me. Because I wasn't just asleep. I was smiling. A soft, slack expression. Just a curl at the edge of my mouth. I didn't remember dreaming. Didn't remember feeling anything at all. But that grin, subtle, almost content, didn't belong to the fear and tension I remembered from that night. I hadn't looked like someone hiding from something just outside the tent. I looked like someone waiting for it. He left the forest before sunrise. Left the tent behind. Left the firewood he'd stacked. The tripod he'd used for long exposures. Even the sealed bags of food hanging from the tree branch. Left everything. It didn't matter anymore. None of it did. There was no closure waiting in that clearing. No explanation to be found in the soil. Just that shape behind the tent flap, and the camera he never touched turning its eye toward him. Even with the windows rolled up and the radio playing static through the drive home, the silence felt thick. Watching. He checked the rearview mirror too often, like something might rise out of the back seat while the wheels spun over empty highway. The further he got from the trailhead, the more absurd it all seemed. But every time the image flashed in his mind, the glint of the zipper, the pale scalp crouched just outside, his stomach turned to stone. When he got home, things felt off. Not immediately. At first glance, everything looked the same. Mail on the counter. The faint smell of detergent. That comfortingly mundane atmosphere that had always made his little one-bedroom apartment feel like a safe zone. But underneath that familiarity was something else. A tension, a static charge in the air, the sense that something had been rearranged without being touched. He first noticed the camera light in the living room. It blinked once. Just once. He hadn't turned it on. It wasn't scheduled to record, and motion sensors shouldn't have activated. But there was that tiny red flicker that meant the lens had just caught something. He checked the footage. Nothing. Just an empty room. A slow drift of shadows cast by passing headlights. But the timestamp was from the exact moment he'd entered the apartment, as if the camera had been watching the door, or expecting him. He brushed it off. Jet lag. Adrenaline hangover. Imagination working overtime after 3 nights of bad sleep and worse footage. Then he saw the scratches. 3 of them. Narrow, uneven, just inside the front door where the wood floor met the threshold. Not deep, but fresh enough that the finish had been flaked away, revealing pale streaks beneath. They weren't there before. He knelt down, ran a finger over them. They didn't look like marks left by shoes or pets. They looked like they'd been etched there, clawed, even. 3 curved lines slightly staggered, like a hand dragging across the floor. And the smell. So subtle at first he thought he'd imagined it, like wet soil left in a closed jar. Earthy and stale, with an edge of rot. The kind of smell you only notice when the air's still. It clung to the baseboards, seemed strongest near the floor vents. He bought new trail cams that night. Smaller models. Wireless. One in the hallway. One facing the back door. One in the bedroom, tucked behind the bookshelf. Another in the living room, mounted low and facing the couch. He didn't have a plan, just a need to know, a need to see. The first night, nothing happened. Or, rather, nothing obvious. He stayed up, eyes fixed on the camera feeds, jumping at every flicker. At one point, the hallway camera shifted slightly, only a fraction of an inch, but enough to notice. The footage showed no movement, just a long stretch of empty carpet. But the frame had changed. The second night, something moved. It was after 3 a.m. Of course it was. The hallway cam picked it up first. A blur, just at the edge. A low, slithering motion. He slowed the footage, frame by frame. There it was, the same crouched figure, bent low, crawling on limbs too long, joints too wrong. It moved like it had no weight, no spine. Like it was built for one purpose only, to stay low, to stay hidden, to crawl. It didn't look at the camera. It didn't need to. It moved past the door to the bedroom. Then the footage cut. A moment of static. A glitch. When it resumed, the camera angle had changed. He stared for an hour at that freeze frame. The hallway, empty again. Carpet undisturbed. But the lens now tilted a few degrees lower, showing more of the floor. More space for something to crawl through. He checked the locks. Reinforced the windows. But there was no sign of forced entry. No broken latches. Nothing stolen. Just that slow shift in the air. That faint, damp smell. The third night, the bedroom camera caught movement. Only briefly, 2 frames at most. A flicker of motion near the closet. A ripple in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. Nothing solid, just the idea of motion. He scrubbed through it again and again, but it never got clearer. And each night, he felt it more. The sensation of being watched. Not from across the room, but from somewhere lower. Behind the couch. Beneath the bed. Inside the crawl space his apartment didn't have. The fourth night, he didn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., the bedroom camera activated. It began with stillness. Then a movement, slow, precise. Something entering the room, sliding across the floor like a shadow with weight. It crept along the baseboard, staying just out of view. He fast-forwarded. The figure reappeared, closer now. Half in frame. One pale hand reaching forward. A hint of shoulder. The top of a hunched head. Still crawling. Still watching. Then another glitch. 7 seconds lost to static. When the image returned, the camera had shifted again. Now it was pointed at the bed. At him. He was lying still. Eyes closed. Arms tucked at his sides. Just like the footage from a tent. But this time, he wasn't smiling. He woke up cold. Mouth dry. Light creeping through the blinds. And something sharp beneath his fingertips. He sat up. His nails were caked with dirt. The dark, moist kind. The smell hit him before the realization did. Earth and something deeper. Fungal. Decaying. There was a cut on the side of his foot. Small but fresh. Like something had nicked him. He pushed the covers aside and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. That's when he saw it. Etched into the wood floor beside the nightstand. Letters scratched in narrow, jagged lines. Not deep. Not clean. Just one word. Look. He stared at it, throat tight, and suddenly knew what it felt like to be prey. Not hunted in the open, but watched. Examined. Toyed with. And whatever it wasn't finished. Sleep became a memory. Something abstract like warmth in winter or the smell of pine at dusk. He stopped counting the days since he'd last rested properly. His world narrowed to screens and shadows, eyes raw from staring at shifting pixels, fingers cramped from clicking frame by frame by frame. He didn't leave the apartment, didn't trust the daylight, or the feeling that sunlight only served to create deeper shadows inside. The cameras stayed on, all of them. Motion detection was no longer enough. He needed continuity. No more gaps, no more static. He would capture it in full this time. He had to. The living room cam, the hallway cam, bedroom cam, kitchen, even the crawl space vent behind the water heater. They ran continuously, uploading to a private drive in real time, storage limits be damned. Most of the footage was uneventful. Long hours of stillness. Dust drifting in filtered light. HVAC systems humming. Nothing unusual. Until 3:12 a.m., 5 days into the surveillance loop. The hallway camera picked it up first. Motion, slow, deliberate, almost elegant in its grotesquerie. It entered the frame like a shadow poured into flesh. No sound, no urgency, just presence. Pale skin slick with dampness, like something birthed in soil and left to ferment beneath roots and stones. The creature's limbs moved with practiced disorder, elbows bending in ways that defied anatomy, knees inverted, shoulders distended as if they'd been unhinged from a skeleton no longer following human architecture. It crawled, always crawled. Walking, it seemed, was a forgotten language. The body moved forward without a sound. Only the faint shift of air, the way light distorted slightly around it, as if the lens resisted clarity. Its face remained obscured, bent low, but one detail remained visible, the mouth. Grinning, always grinning, not in joy, not even in hunger, but recognition. It didn't look at the camera. It didn't need to. It already knew where he was. It moved as though the entire floor plan of the apartment was etched beneath its skin. He paused the video, zoomed in. The gray made details waver, but it was enough. This was the thing from the forest. Not an animal, not a trick of shadow, not a person in a mask. This was the shape that had waited behind the tent flap. This was the thing that never touched the center of the trail cam's frame, but knew exactly where its borders ended. It had followed him. No, it had already chosen him. He resumed playback. The creature crawled down the hallway, tracing the baseboards like a tide, rising along the shore. It reached the bedroom door, paused, then the footage stuttered, froze, corrupted. 12 seconds of static. The timestamp blinked, skipped ahead. When the image returned, the hallway was empty. He turned to the bedroom feed. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. The camera showed nothing but static. Not a frozen image, not black, static. Violent, rippling distortion. Digital noise that almost resembled breathing if watched long enough. A rhythm. In, out. Like something was sitting directly in front of the lens. Watching. It lasted 46 minutes. When the picture returned, the angle had changed. The camera, originally fixed on the doorway, now faced inward, pointed directly at the bed. He didn't remember adjusting it. There, at the edge of the mattress, something sat. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat, too rigid to be resting, too still to be sleeping. The figure was hunched, its long limbs bent and drawn close, as if folding in on itself. Its back was to the lens, but the outline of its head was unmistakable. Pale, smooth, rounded like a stone polished by time. The skin caught the low light in a way that looked wet, almost translucent. No hair, no use, just the suggestion of something listening anyway. It stayed like that for several minutes. Then it was gone. The next frame showed the bed empty. Sheets undisturbed. But he hadn't moved. He had been in that bed all night. Awake, or asleep. He couldn't tell anymore. He checked the footage again. Nothing showed it leaving. It had vanished the same way it came, in silence. The next morning, his limbs felt heavy. He couldn't remember falling asleep, but the fog behind his eyes told him he had. And once again, something was under his fingernails. Dirt. He tried to shake it, tried to convince himself that this was a breaking point, a moment where sleep deprivation was bending reality around him. But he couldn't shake what the footage showed, couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow it. So he returned to the beginning. He opened the original footage from the forest, night 1. The night before he noticed the crawling. There had been nothing odd about it, not the first time. Just fog rolling in, stars blinking through tree branches, his tent faintly illuminated by the rising moon. He went through it frame by frame, and there it was, near the far edge of the clearing, beyond the circle of visible brush, between 2 trees, barely noticeable, 2 faint, glinting dots, eyes, reflective like an animal's, but placed too high, too far apart. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched. Every night, he realized it had been there, not crawling toward the tent, not approaching, waiting. The tent hadn't attracted it. He had pitched the tent in its path, its territory, its home, and when he left, it followed. Not with speed, not with urgency, but with intent, because it had chosen him, not to harm, not yet, but to be near, to be known, still crawling, still watching, still smiling.